The elevator hummed softly as it carried Marcus Chun to the 47th floor, his cleaning cart rattling gently beside him. For in the morning meant the building belonged to him alone, a cathedral of glass and steel stretching into the darkness above downtown. He moved through the executive corridors with practiced silence, his footsteps muffled on the plush carpeting that seemed to absorb sound itself. Marcus had learned to be invisible here. 3 years of night shifts had taught him the art of existing without disturbing, of maintaining the pristine world where decisions worth millions happen daily. He pulled his car to the first office, withdrawing supplies with the careful precision of someone who understood that every movement mattered. The small photograph tucked into his cart pocket showed Emma's gap-toothed smile, taken on her first day of second grade. She would be sleeping now in their small apartment, dreaming whatever 80-year-olds dreamed. Good morning from wherever you're listening. What time is it where you are right now? The building held its secrets in these quiet hours. Marcus noticed things others missed. The way morning light would soon paint the glass walls gold. The subtle shift in air pressure that meant the executive floors were sealed against the world below. He had always been observant, even when observation was no longer his profession. The security office door swung open with unnecessary force, announcing Bradley Thornton's arrival before Marcus heard his heavy footsteps. Thornton carried himself like a man who believed his uniform granted him authority over anyone wearing coveralls. His chest puffed with a kind of confidence that came from never being challenged. Well, what do we have here?" Thornton said, his voice cutting through the morning silence. "Just a janitor, making his rounds like a good little worker bee." Marcus continued polishing the marble reception desk, his movements steady and deliberate. He had learned that responding to Thornton's provocations only escalated situations that were better left to fade into silence. The security chief circled him like a predator sizing up prey, clearly disappointed by the lack of reaction. "You know what I think?" Thornton continued, leaning against the desk Marcus had just cleaned. "I think people like you don't really understand what goes on up here. All these important documents, all these million-dollar decisions. Probably can't even read half the stuff you're cleaning around." The words hung in the air like smoke, designed to humiliate and diminish. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he had carried for 3 years whenever someone reduced him to nothing more than his current circumstances. He straightened slowly, meeting Thornton's gaze with quiet dignity that somehow made the security chief shift uncomfortably. "I understand more than you think," Marcus said softly, then returned to his work. Victoria Sterling's heels clicked against the marble floor with the rhythm of someone who had built an empire one careful step at a time. At 6:30 in the morning, she was already reviewing quarterly reports on her tablet, her mind calculating projections and strategies, while most of the city still slept. The elevator carried her to the executive floor, where she had spent the last 15 years transforming Technova from a struggling startup into an industry leader. "Good morning, Marcus," she said without looking up from her screen as she passed him in the hallway. It was a small acknowledgement, but one she offered consistently. Unlike others in the building, Victoria noticed the way Marcus arranged things, how documents were never disturbed, how the air seemed cleaner after his careful attention to the ventilation systems. Her corner office overlooked the sprawling city below, but this morning her thoughts were consumed by Jamie's upcoming doctor's appointment. Her 12-year-old son's asthma had been worsening despite the specialists and expensive treatments. Last night's episode had lasted longer than usual, his inhaler barely helping as she held him close and counted each labored breath. Victoria set her tablet aside and pulled out her phone, scrolling through text messages from Jamie's overnight caregiver. "Everything normal," the message read, but Victoria knew normal was relative when your child struggled to breathe. She had built a company worth billions, yet felt powerless watching her son fight for something as simple as air. The small apartment felt warm and alive when Marcus returned home at 8 in the morning, sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, where Emma sat with her math homework spread across the table. She looked up with a kind of smile that could chase away any darkness from the night shift, her dark hair falling in gentle waves around her face. "Daddy, can you help me with this problem?" she asked, pointing to a fraction equation that looked more complex than it should for second grade. Marcus settled beside her, his work clothes still carrying the faint scent of cleaning supplies, but Emma never seemed to mind. She leaned against his shoulder as he guided her through the steps, his explanations patient and thorough. "You're really smart, Daddy," Emma said as they finished the worksheet. "Why don't you work at a hospital like the doctors on TV?" The question hung between them like a bridge Marcus wasn't ready to cross. He smoothed her hair gently, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes life takes us on different paths than we expect, sweetheart. The important thing is that we take care of each other." Emma nodded with the easy acceptance children possessed, already moving on to show him a drawing she had made of the two of them standing outside a big building. In her 80-year-old imagination, they were both smiling and the sun was shining bright yellow. Marcus tucked the drawing into his shirt pocket, right next to the photograph he carried to work each night. Thornton's voice echoed through the executive floor as he cornered Marcus near the conference room, his words sharp with the kind of cruelty that came from someone who enjoyed wielding power over those he perceived as powerless. "You know what your problem is," he said, blocking Marcus's path with his bulky frame. "People like you think you can just waltz into places like this and pretend you belong." Marcus continued organizing his cleaning supplies, his movements deliberate and calm despite the tension building in his shoulders. Through the glass walls of Victoria's office, he could see her pacing while speaking rapidly into her phone, her face etched with worry. He had noticed the pattern over recent weeks, the late-night calls about medical appointments and specialist consultations. "I've been watching you," Thornton continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "The way you look at things, like you think you understand what's happening here. But you're just the help, and it's time you remembered that." The security chief stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space with calculated intimidation. "Maybe it's time we found someone more suitable for this position. Someone who knows their place and doesn't get ideas above their station. Has anyone ever underestimated you?" Marcus thought as he watched Victoria through the glass, her distress palpable even from this distance. "Share your story in the comments." Marcus straightened to his full height, meeting Thornton's gaze with quiet dignity. "I know exactly where I belong," he said softly. The executive break room held secrets that most people missed, but Marcus noticed everything. While restocking the first aid cabinet, he discovered medications that had expired 6 months ago, their labels faded and contents potentially dangerous. He quietly removed them, replacing expired epinephrine auto-injectors with fresh ones from the supply room that somehow nobody else had thought to check. Later, as he cleaned the air filtration control panel, Marcus observed the system's irregular cycling patterns. The building's ventilation wasn't maintaining proper humidity levels, creating conditions that could trigger respiratory issues for sensitive individuals. He made subtle adjustments to the settings, improvements that would go unnoticed but could make breathing easier for everyone on the floor. Victoria emerged from her office carrying a thick folder of medical reports, her steps heavy with exhaustion. She paused near the reception desk, where Marcus was working, watching as he carefully positioned the emergency oxygen tank that had been carelessly shoved behind a decorative plant. The tank was now easily accessible, properly marked, and positioned where it could actually help someone in crisis. "You moved the oxygen tank," Victoria observed, her voice curious rather than accusatory. Marcus looked up from his work, meeting her gaze with steady eyes that held knowledge she was beginning to recognize. "It's better positioned there," he said simply. "More accessible if someone needs it quickly." Victoria nodded slowly, filing away another piece of the puzzle that was Marcus Chun. Jamie Sterling arrived at the office after school with his backpack slung over one shoulder and his inhaler clutched in his small hand. His breathing carried the telltale wheeze that had become more frequent lately, each breath requiring conscious effort rather than the automatic rhythm most people took for granted. Victoria's face brightened at seeing her son, but Marcus noticed the worry lines that deepened as she observed Jamie's labored respirations. Construction work on the 15th floor had begun that morning, renovating the conference facilities with new carpeting and wall treatments. The industrial adhesives and synthetic materials released chemical vapors that rose through the building's ventilation system, creating an invisible threat for anyone with respiratory sensitivities. Marcus watched the air quality monitors with growing concern, noting readings that climbed steadily throughout the afternoon. He approached Thornton's security station with careful urgency. "The construction fumes are affecting the air quality on the upper floors," Marcus said, pointing to the monitoring system. "We should increase ventilation and maybe relocate anyone with breathing issues." Thornton barely looked up from his magazine. "Listen, janitor, I don't need cleaning staff telling me how to run building security. Those monitors always fluctuate. Mind your own business and stick to what you know." Marcus felt the familiar frustration building as he watched Jamie through the glass walls, the boy's chest rising and falling with increasing difficulty. The child needed cleaner air, and Marcus knew exactly what adjustments would help, but his warnings fell on ears deafened by prejudice. The crisis struck without warning in the executive conference room, where Jamie had been quietly doing homework while his mother finished an urgent client call. His breathing suddenly became desperate gasps, each inhalation a struggle that sent panic shooting through Victoria's chest. She dropped her phone mid-sentence and rushed to her son's side as his lips began taking on a frightening blue tinge. "Call 911." Victoria shouted to her assistant while grabbing Jamie's emergency inhaler from his backpack. The medication that usually provided relief barely seemed to register, his airways too constricted to allow the medication to reach where it was needed most. Jamie's eyes were wide with the terror that came from feeling like he was drowning in air. Thornton burst into the room with his usual bluster, immediately taking charge in the way people do when they mistake authority for competence. He fumbled with basic first aid protocols, checking Jamie's pulse awkwardly while barking orders that only added to the chaos. The ambulance was delayed by rush hour traffic and construction detours, precious minutes ticking away while Jamie fought for every breath. Victoria knelt beside her son, holding his hand and whispering reassurances that felt hollow against his worsening condition. The inhaler wasn't working, Thornton's first aid knowledge was proving inadequate, and help seemed impossibly far away. In the hallway, Marcus watched through the glass walls, his hands clenched as he witnessed a child's life hanging in the balance, while incompetence masqueraded as expertise. Marcus stepped into the conference room with the quiet authority of someone who had faced countless medical emergencies, his transformation immediate and undeniable. Thornton moved to block him, shouting that this was no place for cleaning staff, but Marcus gently pushed past with the calm urgency of a physician who understood that seconds could mean the difference between life and death. "Step back, please," Marcus said to Victoria, his voice carrying the steady confidence that had once commanded operating rooms. He knelt beside Jamie, his trained hands immediately assessing the child's condition with practiced efficiency. "Severe bronchospasm with cyanosis," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else as his medical instincts took complete control. Moving with swift precision, Marcus grabbed the small oxygen tank he had repositioned days earlier, connecting tubing he fashioned from supplies in his cleaning cart. He created an improvised nebulizer using a plastic water bottle and the boy's inhaler medication, delivering the bronchodilator directly to Jamie's constricted airways in a way that bypassed the obstruction. "What are you doing?" Thornton demanded, but his voice had lost its commanding edge as he watched Marcus work with the unmistakable skill of someone who belonged in a medical crisis. Victoria stared in stunned recognition as this man she had known only as a janitor demonstrated expertise that surpassed anything she had ever witnessed. Jamie's breathing began to ease under Marcus's expert care, color slowly returning to his frightened face. As Jamie's breathing stabilized and color returned to his cheeks, Victoria looked at Marcus with eyes that held 1,000 questions. The paramedics arrived to find a child who was conscious and breathing normally, thanks to expert intervention that had prevented a potentially fatal episode. They listened with professional respect as Marcus provided a detailed medical report, using terminology that left no doubt about his background. "You're a doctor," Victoria said, her voice filled with wonder and confusion. Marcus nodded slowly, his hand still gentle on Jamie's wrist as he monitored the boy's pulse. "Former chief of emergency medicine at St. Mary's Hospital," he said quietly. "I lost my license 3 years ago, defending a treatment decision that was later proven correct, but not before the malpractice suit destroyed my career." The weight of his sacrifice settled over the room like a shroud. He had chosen to save lives over protecting his reputation, and when the medical board failed to support him, he had quietly accepted his exile from the profession he loved. Victoria realized she was looking at a man who had traded his calling for his principles and then spent 3 years invisibly serving others in whatever way he could. This story shows how first impressions can be so wrong, Marcus thought as he watched Jamie smile weakly from the stretcher. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Thornton stood in the corner, his usual bluster replaced by uncomfortable silence as the full scope of his prejudice became undeniable. The man he had dismissed as worthless had just saved a child's life with skills he could never possess. Victoria's voice carried the authority of someone who had built an empire through decisive action when she turned to face Thornton in the aftermath of the crisis. "For 3 years, you have treated this man with contempt and disrespect," she said, her words sharp as surgical instruments. "You dismissed his concerns about air quality that could have prevented this entire emergency, and you tried to interfere when he was saving my son's life." Thornton shifted uncomfortably, his usual confidence crumbling under the weight of his exposed prejudice. He mumbled something about following protocol, but Victoria cut him off with a gesture that brooked no argument. "Your employment here is terminated immediately," she said. "Security will escort you out." She turned to Marcus with an expression that held both gratitude and profound respect. "Dr. Chun, I would like to offer you the position of Chief Medical Officer for Technova Industries," she said. "Your expertise could help us create safer work environments and provide emergency medical support for our employees. Moreover, I have connections at the medical board who can help you begin the process of license reinstatement." Marcus looked at this woman who had seen past his circumstances to recognize his true worth, then glanced at Jamie, who was now breathing easily and offering him a shy smile. The boy reminded him of Emma, innocent and deserving of protection. After 3 years of invisibility, someone finally saw him for who he really was beneath the coveralls and cleaning cart. 6 months later, Dr. Marcus Chun stood in the newly constructed medical center on the 25th floor of Technova Industries, wearing scrubs instead of coveralls, his stethoscope a symbol of restored purpose rather than lost dreams. The medical board had not only reinstated his license, but publicly acknowledged the correctness of his controversial decision that had cost him everything years before. Emma bounded through the door of his office with the boundless energy of a 9-year-old who had watched her father reclaim his calling. She wore a visitor's badge that read doctor's daughter with obvious pride, her gap-toothed smile even brighter than the one in the photograph he still carried. Behind her, Jamie Sterling entered more cautiously, his breathing easy and unrestricted thanks to the improved air quality systems Marcus had designed throughout the building. The two children had become fast friends, bonding over homework sessions in Marcus's office while he trained the new emergency response team. Victoria often joined them, grateful beyond words for the man who had saved her son and transformed her company's approach to employee health and safety. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're listening from and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Marcus thought as he watched Emma help Jamie with his math homework, their laughter filling the space where once only silence had lived. From invisible janitor to valued healer, Marcus had learned that sometimes the longest journey was simply the path back to yourself.